A friend of the show, somebody we talk to frequently, he's actually participating in Johnson & Johnson's vaccine trial. Senator Rob Portman joins us. And Senator, it's good to see you this morning.
Becky, good to see you guys.
Before we talk about your involvement in the J&J trial, let's just talk about what's happening with COVID, where things stand. It's been rocketing across the country, especially in the Midwest. I know Ohio has had its struggles. What's your take, just being out there, seeing what you see and hearing from your constituents?
As the last report indicated, the Midwest is being hit particularly hard, but it's all over the country now. And sadly, the phase 3 that many predicted has happened as people have moved indoors, the weather's gotten colder. So we have more cases in Ohio, we have more hospitalizations, more ICU, and sadly, more fatalities. I think, Becky, that masks are a good idea. You see, I've got mine on this morning. I wore my Ohio one just for Joe. Social distancing, very important. But the most important thing we can do right now is get these vaccines out and on the market. And we have to ensure that people are actually going to get vaccinated. It's one thing to have the vaccines, which I think will be ready by the end of this year. So really in just, a month and a half. But we got to be sure that people are willing to be vaccinated. So the reason I participated in this trial was because I think the vaccines are so important. I started about 12 days ago, even before we learned about Moderna and Pfizer's great success, the 95 and 90% efficacy. But this is the most important single thing that we can do. Second, I learned from an Ohio company that's servicing many of these contracts around the country that it's difficult sometimes to get people to join these trials. And so I thought by doing it and going public, we might get more people to do it. It's a great idea. It's relatively easy to go through the process. You keep a diary and so on, but it's they're professional and courteous, and I encourage more people to do it. And then finally, the numbers about people's willingness to be vaccinated are actually pretty scary to me, because the Gallup poll from October, the latest data we have, shows that 50% of Americans are not comfortable with getting a vaccine right now. I think that's partly because of what happened during the campaign, which was very unfortunate, where you had some people saying that the vaccines were not safe because the Trump administration was in charge. I mean, these are FDA professionals, these are scientists that are taking extraordinary measures to be sure it's safe. And so I want to encourage everyone, to participate in the trial if you're comfortable doing that, but certainly to get the vaccine when it's available.
Senator, let's just talk about, you started this 12 days ago with the vaccine. Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought Johnson & Johnson is just a one-dose shot versus the 2 shots that you have to take.
That's correct.
With both Pfizer and Moderna. So how do you feel? How have you been going?
I feel great. I feel great. And, 50% of the people get the placebo, 50% get the actual vaccination. I don't know which I got, but I feel great. And, again, I keep a diary, and every Monday and Thursday now I report back as to whether I have symptoms. And, it's easy to go through. And, again, I encourage people to do it, because the more people that participate in the trials, the sooner they can get to the FDA for the emergency use authorization, and the quicker we can get it out to the American people. And this is so important. I mean, it's a much better solution than lockdowns. It's a much better solution than keeping people out of school and out of our churches and other places of worship. It's the most important single thing, in my view. Congress ought to pass another COVID-19 bill, in part to provide the necessary funding to ensure that the vaccination progress continues. Warp speed has been unbelievable. It's been unprecedented how quickly this has happened compared to any other vaccine development. It's, again, being done very carefully with scientists taking the lead. Science is calling the shots. But they do need to have additional funding from the federal government, because the government is essentially providing the funding for the manufacture of the vaccines while the studies are going on. And if the vaccines end up being successful in getting the approval, then they'll be ready to go. That's expensive, and it's important to be sure the resources are there for that. I think it's the best expenditure of taxpayer money I can think of.
It's expensive, and it's also complicated. And yesterday, Joe Biden complained that the current administration's lack of cooperation with his incoming administration is starting to create a problem, especially in terms of dealing with COVID. What would you say to that point?
Well, I'd say 2 things. One, the professionals like Tony Fauci are going to be there, and that's good, because the institutional knowledge will be there, not just at the FDA, but the NIH, and, again, professionals like Dr. Fauci and others who run the task force. So I'm not so concerned about that. But second, during this period of time, of course, information should be shared, and that can be done. I don't see a problem with that. I think the security briefings are along the same lines. I do think the president deserves the chance to have his court cases be heard. He deserves the chance to get, the final recounts, and certainly every vote needs to be counted. And that's not going to take forever. So in the meantime, I think it's important to provide information to ensure we don't lose track. But I think in the coronavirus case, many of those professionals who are currently working on it and are very involved with Warp Speed, as an example, will continue to do so because they're not political appointees.
Let's talk about the idea of a stimulus package, starting with the money being there to make sure these vaccinations are put out. I mean, that's a huge issue. How do you have both houses of Congress saying, okay, at this point, we're going to go on vacation, we're going to leave and go back home for Thanksgiving and for Christmas. We're not going to take care of making sure there's money there to get these vaccines out, of making sure that while these lockdowns continue and the cases continue to climb, we're not going to deal with PPP and making sure there's money for small businesses or for people who have been laid off or for the testing or anything else that goes through this. I mean, at some point, it's kind of hard to justify.
I couldn't agree with you more, and we need to act and act now. And we can't do everything. The bill that Nancy Pelosi has been promoting, $3.5 trillion. She now says it could be $2.5 trillion. We don't need all that, but we do need the basic things you just talked about. A number of these items expire at the end of the year, including, by the way, the expansion of unemployment insurance, which is really important right now because with all these shutdowns happening all around the country, think of the number of people who are losing their jobs and joining the unemployment insurance ranks. And some of them are falling off UI because by year end, again, this expansion that was put in place during the coronavirus ends. So there are a number of items, including some important tax relief that's out there. Obviously, the PPP is really important to small businesses. Again, some of those businesses are now being forced to shut down by government edict again. We need to help them. So my hope is that we can have a bipartisan group here in the Senate. I've been talking to colleagues on both sides of the aisle about this to help on a targeted, effective program that deals with what we have to deal with now to get through this valley really between now and March. Because by March, we should have these vaccines widely available. And again, I hope people take advantage of it. We've got to encourage people to do that. If that happens, that will protect them and their families, but also protect others. But then during that interim period, I'm very concerned with what might happen, both for our health care, but also for our economy. So let's do it. It doesn't need to be a huge package, but it should be targeted and focused. And my hope is we can get something done before, we take off for the recess after Thanksgiving.
Senator Portman, I wish more of your colleagues would listen to you. A lot of common sense there. And by the way, thank you for your leadership in showing people how important it is to have these vaccines and to stepping up and signing up for one of these trials yourself. It's really great to see you.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Senator. Maybe draft some got some defensive guys, maybe? Just think about, just a thought.
How about the offensive line?
Offensive line. You sucked me back in. I was on board, and now I regret it. Anyway, coming up.